Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast with Tom Fox and Roy Snell. Today we have a very special episode, the Retirement Edition. In this episode, Roy Snell announces his retirement as the CEO of the SCCE. He talks about the process by which the organization will go through to seek out his replacement. He talks about some of his plans going forward, and he talks about the growth of the SCCE and the HCCA over the past 15 or 20 years. He gives us a retrospective of where the compliance profession has come since the enactment of the U.S. sentencing guidelines in 1992 and where he hopes to see compliance go in the future. It's really a fascinating episode. In the show notes, I link to information if you're interested in applying for the CEO position at the SCCE. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Unfair and Unbalanced. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back with my good friend and colleague Roy Snell for another episode of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast on the compliance profession. Roy, you have some big news, so I don't want to say I broke the news, but I'm certainly a part of it going forward. So why don't you tell our listeners what news you have?
Well, Tom, we're going to be announcing my retirement here shortly, and the search for someone to take our organization through the next 20 years. We have put together a succession planning committee of some great people, including Debbie Troclis, Dan Roach, Gabe Imprado, and some others, and we're hired a recruiter. We're going to be making the announcement shortly here, and we're going to spend about 60 days looking for people to apply for the job, and then 60 days interviewing, evaluating, and deciding, hopefully. We're going to bring the person on as a deputy CEO for a year or so until somewhere around the spring of 2019, and give them a chance to get their sea legs and learn about the back room and all sorts of things that people don't get to see but are important to our success. I will be getting out, retiring about March of 2020. I'll stick around for a year after they assume the title. Is the current plan. All of this is subject to change, and help them in any way I can. But it all seems to be pretty far in advance. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of associations like ours who have had as much as 6 months notice, which is an awful lot from their CEO. And it's just not enough time to look for anyone, let alone bring them along carefully. There's all kinds of horror stories about transitions that didn't go well, particularly for longtime executives and people who follow them. And anybody who's followed us real closely knows we try to do a few things and do them extremely well. There are a few things we'll just beat to death that we feel are really important, and this is one of them. We're very excited to find somebody to get us through the next 15, 20 years or so. It's unlikely that the kind of person who got us this far from zero is the same kind of person to take us from where we are to where we need to be next. So we built a good foundation and looking to hand this off. And like I said, it's a long-term plan, but if you look at most associations haven't had the opportunity to do this, their CEOs just don't give them enough time. A lot of them hurt, they'll go through one or two or made, a couple CEOs right after the long-term executive leaves. It's not always the case, but it happens way too often. It's just too abrupt. It's too abrupt. And I'm in a position where I can work with this board and give them plenty of time. And we'll adjust it along the way if need be to make sure we do right by the organization. But yeah, that's kind of the plan, and we're looking forward to seeing what kind of candidates are out there.
Roy, do you have any type of potential candidate in your mind, meaning someone from the nonprofit world, someone from a for-profit corporation, someone from the government, someone from private practice, or really anybody that kind of meets some basic minimums could throw their hat in the ring?
Well, one of the things that some people may find hard to believe, but it's very true. I've been in on all the meetings of the Succession Planning Committee. We really don't have a specific candidate in mind, or even a specific background or type. I would say a couple of things that are really important is someone who is extremely fluent in the profession. There are two approaches associations take to get a CEO. One is an association executive, someone who is a journeyman that goes from one association to another and really knows how to run an association. But they don't really come from any of the professions that they are an association CEO for. Then the other approach is to pluck somebody out of the profession so that they can speak for and about and to the profession that they're the CEO of, and possibly even make better decisions because they understand the job because they've had it or worked in the field somewhere. And we're definitely going to find someone who is very fluent in this profession and familiar with the challenges of the job. And there are certainly many people that have that ability and then, or background. And then out of that group, I think the next most important thing is, maybe equally important, is some proven business acumen, because anybody who follows associations knows that you're either going forward or backward, and some people really understand their profession and not exactly revenue and expense and all these sorts of things. That can be a little problematic. We're going to focus very hard on trying to find someone who understands business and return on investment, effort, and time. And I think those are the two most important things: is being fluent in the profession and being able to help out from a business standpoint.
You know, one of the things that I think that our listeners might be interested in is really the business of SCCE. Could you maybe describe the kind of parameters, the size, and really
Sure.
the business part of it?
SCCE and HCCA in total are about 21 years old. And we now are up to about $22 million a year in revenue, which probably puts us mid-pack in all the association world. There's some that are bigger and many that are smaller. We have saved more than the national average of money, the reserves. We have more than the goal of associations for the most part over the years has been 1/2 of your annual expenses in reserve, and we're more than that, and growing every year. And frankly, we would like to get to one-time annual expenses to be extra careful, but I don't recall ever having to dip into the reserves, and we've gone through some big challenges in terms of 2008, and frankly 9/11 shut down a lot of travel. We have the main revenue sources would be membership, publications, conferences, these sorts of things, and we're looking to expand those. Hopefully, we just hired a new chief marketing officer, and shortly someone in the publishing platform background, and which leads me to another thing, is that although we want someone with the ability to manage a business, it's an awful lot of revenue not to know anything about business. But we have a really solid staff here now. After flailing away for all these years, we've got some strong people in finance and operations, and we're making an offer here shortly for a guy in publications. So hopefully we'll get him. And we're now able to hire people with a greater degree of experience. And when we were smaller, it was tougher to justify the salaries. Now we're getting into a salary range for some of these folks that we're able to get folks with many years of real solid experience. So I think that's it. From a business standpoint, things are growing. They've been growing forever. We're in a pretty solid financial situation, and we're very excited about the idea of finding someone to come in with a whole bunch of fresh ideas and enthusiasm and get us through the next 20 years.
Roy, you've mentioned that 20 years a couple of times, and it seems to me that the compliance profession really is on the cusp of some not only pretty dramatic changes, but even more dramatic growth. And the things that the things that you've been preaching basically for 20 years, as you so eloquently said, unless you were in a cave. Those things are really now part of the public record. The Department of Justice is talking about them. So the kind of the basic ideas of how to have an effective compliance program that you and many others have been preaching about and articulating and writing about and thinking about and talking about for a long time have really been embraced by the government. And now the government has really taken FCPA and broader anti-corruption enforcement globally. So we've got really a global anti-corruption protocol of both enforcement and the solution, which is the best practices compliance program. And then going forward, though, I see a lot of potential use for compliance as a business process. I see potential for compliance to really be in the buzzword of the Department of Justice evaluation of corporate compliance documents operationalized. And I see compliance really becoming the businesses embracing compliance as a way to operate businesses more efficiently and at the end of the day more profitably. Would you see that as one of the kind of goals or where compliance might be going in the next 20 years?
Yeah, I want to make two comments on things you've talked about, which I was just talking to somebody today where we're trying to find this. We hopefully found this publishing person who won't bring us up to date in the publishing field, but know roughly where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years. and get started now. Halfway through the hiring process, I told the recruiter, I kept telling him in the beginning, we don't want somebody who's familiar with print. Print isn't happening in publishing as much as it used to. We want somebody that understands these platforms and other approaches online. And then it dawned on me, well, if that profession is changing as much as ours, there are going to be people like Tom Fox in there who can see 5-10 years down the road. And you just picked on two things I don't think people realize, and I don't talk about much because it's a little bit out there. And the first one is 20 years back and 20 years forward, and we've been on point for 20 years and helped. But when you got an idea like compliance that is so brilliant, such an elegant, simple solution to a serious problem, there's going to be a lot of points. There's going to be a lot of folks out there, a lot of organizations, a lot of government agencies, a lot of countries who smack their forehead and say, this is the right thing for our fixing our problems. And I want to back up even further than that. Something you implied, and is very true, is this is I'd love to think we've helped a lot, and I think we've helped a lot, but this is inevitable. There's no stopping this. This is a movement of people in countries all over the world saying, I'm done with this. I'm not going to put up with these regulatory and ethical missteps by companies or governments, frankly. And they're particularly on edge about corruption. And you and I have talked before about in Romania, they were going to back off a little bit on their corruption regulation, and somewhere between 200,000 or 500,000, I don't know, a whole bunch of people went downtown and in the Capitol or wherever, and they surrounded the building where they were going to make that decision that night and said, I don't think so. And I can't remember, there was another country where there were protests against corruption here recently. I know Brazil's, the folks there pretty much had it up to their eyeballs and are calling for some solution. Well, yeah, I'd like to think we've had it all figured out and we made a big difference, but the things don't get this big all over the world without 1,000 different organizations or people pushing the rock because they all think it's a great idea. And one other thing that you said is that the compliance is more effective at helping an organization than just preventing, finding, and fixing ethical and regulatory issues. It's a great way to find quality issues, audit, monitor, investigate, report, educate, all the tools that are used by an effective compliance officer, including interpersonal skills and influence, can help many areas of the organization assess problems and risks, even if they aren't legal or ethical risks. The risk of downturn in revenue or something. And quality is the best example. There are some regulations with regard to quality, but there's a lot of quality that is a choice. Companies can either produce products that last a year or 10 years. And organizations who really want to go big in quality need to gather data, audit, monitor, investigate, educate, deal with issues, and deal with them quickly. And so I think you're absolutely right. This tool is It's a simple, natural, elegant tool. And I don't know how much further beyond regulatory and ethical compliance it'll be used, but it could be used for other things. And so I think you're right.
Well, and frankly, Roy, that's what I see as one of the lasting legacies of the first generation of compliance professionals such as yourself and some of the board members that you named. I think you took the regulatory framework that was laid out in the U.S. sentencing guidelines that came out in 1992, helped companies comply literally with the law, starting in the healthcare and then moving into more general business, commercial operations. And from that experience, you were able to utilize the skills which allowed compliance with a very specific regulation to broaden it out to other laws, and now really think about it in terms of business process, but more importantly, business improvement. And I'm excited to be a part of that dialogue and outreach going forward, because I think it's really going to help to transform corporate America and indeed corporations across the world, as we spoke about earlier.
Yeah, I'd love to think that SCCE and HCCA has it all going on, and we made a big difference, but we didn't invent anything here. It was invented before we came around. We just stayed focused. I think that the only criticism that I would have of others who really can't claim to have helped as much is they just can't seem to know when enough is enough. And there have been a lot of complicators. I've literally written an article about complicators. I'm not even sure it's a word. It is just a group of people that can't believe or don't understand, can't believe compliance is as simple, or don't understand what a compliance program is. And they're just off in the weeds, and they're overcomplicating it, and they're adding things on like government relations and corporate social responsibility. And, they're just as distracted as the people who came before us. And the people who came before us were so distracted. A profession at near C-suite level was born over a 20-year period almost out of nowhere. And because people who came before us couldn't stay focused. And so it's one thing that we should get some credit for here is ignoring all the shiny objects that many people have drifted off into. And I'll be honest with you, and I don't really want to talk about it much, but the most recent one is politics. That people seem to think that we should be focused on what is the next current and former political environment and how that all affects it. I was a compliance officer for 3 years. Never once did I factor in politics when I went and found and fixed problems. I think that's the thing that we have done, is we just keep coming back to the fundamentals. The reason our profession is here, the reason compliance programs were suggested by the sentencing guidelines, is because we needed to prevent, find, and fix ethical and regulatory problems like Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, HealthSouth, BP, Wells Fargo, Penn State University, Madoff, and others. And all of this shiny object stuff has caused a lot of other folks to wander aimlessly and not do too well. And it's one thing we've done, and I hope we do for the next 20 years, is keep exploring options, but don't forget the mission and don't forget the important stuff. So that's what we're doing here. Is I've been doing this for a long time, this particular job, and we're going to take our time. We're going to do a big search. We're going to be very open-minded. We're going to find someone to come and take a year or so to get their sea legs and then take over the job. And I'll stick around a little bit to help on some special project and be available for the new CEO. But yeah, I'll tell you this, the best metaphor I can come up with that people are very much more familiar with than they are with associations is publicly traded companies. We are not a publicly traded company. We're about as farthest thing from it, but we have something very much in common. We have members, they have shareholders. Now, they're motivated by totally different things, but it's basically a lot of people looking on who care. And when a long-term executive of any publicly traded company decides to move on, sometimes shareholders start wringing their hands. Analysts start wringing their hands. And good publicly traded companies have a nice, long, smooth succession planning process. And frankly, they're a little easier because they have 10,000 employees. We have 50. So we have to do it a little bit differently, but it affects us, makes it a little bit more challenging. But we're pulling not from our employees, but more from the membership, if you will, or the profession. And when they get it right, the company moves on relatively smoothly. When they get it wrong, there's chaos. And it's not a fair example, but John Stump left Wells Fargo abruptly and not very graciously. And Microsoft, on the other hand, did a pretty good job of it. Apple's not been bad. They're a little bumpy, but, you know, so there are companies out there that really do a good job of this. And then there are organizations that, you know, I guess they just don't have enough time. Associations really, it's just a little more difficult for them to get this right. And the only way it's going to get done right is if the outgoing CEO gives them 2-3 years rather than 6 months to a year. So
Roy, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if anybody wants any information about this. If they want to take a look at perhaps throwing their hat in the ring, if they want to be considered, where would they go and how would they find out information on it?
Well, we have some information coming out shortly here with links, and we have a website set up with a job description and a position summary, and then an application in which we ask them to give us a little bit of information beyond their resume about their background. We've hired a recruiter named Brian Bach. What I would suggest is that they look for the email from us. It'll also be posted on my LinkedIn group. We're going to try and plaster this all over the place with the links and such. I'd give them to you, but they're kind of long. The simplest thing to do would be just call the office and ask if they could get some help finding the web page. Once they get to that web page, they might even be able to find that themselves. The web page will be released at 1 Central on tomorrow, which is that the 13th? No, the 12th. Yeah, 13th.
Tomorrow's the 20th.
20th. On the 20th at 1 Central, there'll be a web page released on our website that is full of this information. And if they have any trouble at all, just call our office, and they should be able to find it. We're very interested in hearing from anyone that has any ideas, and I'm very certain that because we're taking the approach that we are, that we're going to find a very solid individual who's going to be able to help us out here and help the profession out for years to come.
Roy, we're at the end of our time, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to share this really important announcement with us, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much, Thomas.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast with Tom Fox and Roy Snell. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast. It would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only podcast which deals with the compliance profession. Also, Roy and I would love to hear from you. You can email Roy at rsnell@scce.org. You can email me at tomfox, tfox@tfoxlaw.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode, the Retirement Edition, and I hope you will join Roy and I again for another episode of Unfair and Unbalanced.